بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وآله وأصحابه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي، اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي. اللهم ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصر أوليائك في غزة، اللهم فرج عنا وعن أوليائك في غزة وفي فلسطين وفي سائر بلادك. اللهم نفس كربنا وكربهم وثبت أقدامنا وأقدامهم والطف بنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين يا أكرم الأكرمين. وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. So we did talk about this passage, but we'll just reread it in order to see if we need to say anything else about it. So a capitalist society here, a capitalist society. So a capitalist society, or a society that is inhabited by a capitalist economy, is one that has on a current basis to work out, how its economic social relations, its specific relations of production and exchange are to connect to and interact with its non-economic social relations. This is so in particular because, as suggested, the former happen to have an inherent tendency to expand into and become dominant relative to their social context. For this reason alone, capitalism must be studied not as a static or a timeless ideal type of an economic system that exists outside of or apart from society, but as a historical social order that is precisely about the relationship between the social and the economic, a social order that came into its own in Western Europe in the early 19th century and has been continuously evolving since. Okay, let's think a bit more about it. It's an important there are a lot of important concepts here, and maybe the best way to read it is through backward. So we'll start from the end of the paragraph or the passage we read, and then move on slowly to the start. So first it says capitalism is not a timeless phenomenon. It emerges within historical time. So it emerges within historical time. In other words, it is a historical social order. So it is not a timeless phenomenon, meaning it's not, for example, it's not like physics, for example. Its laws are not unchangeable laws. On the contrary, capitalism is something which emerges within time, historical time, and it is historically contingent. But that obviously is not, we shouldn't, so historically contingent, capitalism is historically contingent. that is, it emerges within historical time and evolves as to its forms and types and as to its social formation, state formation, etc. But that doesn't contradict two things, at least, or shouldn't. So if something is historically contingent, that it is not necessary for it to exist, that it emerged within specific time, and since it came into being, it can also not exist, for example. That's what contingent means. There's no necessity for it to exist. On the other hand, for example, 2 plus 2 seem to have some sort of necessity which is beyond history and time, etc. Although, obviously, there are mathematicians and logicians who would contest that, but generally speaking. So mathematics or arithmetic in that sense is necessary. It can't be otherwise. Capitalism is contingent. It can be otherwise. Like it didn't exist at a certain point, and it won't exist at a certain point. So in that sense, it is not a timeless phenomenon. That's one sense that it is not a timeless phenomenon. Another sense in which it is not but contingent doesn't mean that it doesn't have any necessity, because there is also a type of necessity which we can call historical necessity. So if something is dominant today, even though it is contingent, so in principle it can be otherwise, but that doesn't mean that we can wish it away. So contingent can be very entrenched depending on how dominant it is and how widespread it is. So capitalism is a contingent system in the sense we describe, but that doesn't deny that it doesn't have historical necessity. And this historical necessity is loosened and broken only when it is challenged from from outside, or due to outside challenge and inner contradictions and inner problems. It can lose its grip on people's mind, but as long as its grip is strong on people's mind and people's thinking and a society's way of life, it is as good as necessary. Yeah, so that's one thing I want to say. And the fact that people start talking about end of capitalism, that can be just a rhetoric, not very genuine. But if it is genuine, that must stem from the fact that, at least for them, capitalism has, at least on them, capitalism has lost its grip. So for them, it is not necessary in the same way as it might be for other people. Okay. Now, the second thing I want to say was just to say that just because capitalism is not a timeless phenomenon, which is correct, and just because capitalism has evolved and it has taken many forms because it's historically contingent and evolving system, horizontally as well as vertically. There are different form types of capitalism, etc. But that doesn't mean that we can't come up with an ideal type. The ideal type would be a timeless phenomenon. So, but we are not saying that that ideal type actually exists anywhere. And obviously that ideal type of capitalism would be different from actually existing capitalism. So then what's the point of coming up with ideal type? The point is that it helps us to understand inner logic capitalism, which is timeless in the sense that inner logic of capitalism means if capitalist rationality, according to the ideal type, actually existed, it would exist in this and that way. And the fact that it doesn't exist in this and that way, that means that capitalism has not fully realized itself. Without buying into all Hegelianism, which might seem to be embedded in this, so that we construct ideal types in order to understand what Streeck has called inherent tendencies of something like actually existing capitalism. So these are two important things, I think. So it is a historically contingent order. It is a historically evolving system. But that doesn't mean that there can't be a historically contingent concept, can't have historical necessity. And secondly, historically contingent and evolving system doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at ideal types and its inherent tendencies. Because if we can understand the ideal type and through it the inherent tendency that is the inner logic of capitalism, so despite the fact that it has evolved, it has manifested itself as many forms, we will be able to discern certain patterns, long-term tendencies which emanate from its inner logic. So a historically contingent thing can have inner logic as well, in the sense that it doesn't have to exist, so it doesn't have to manifest itself. But once it manifests itself, then there are certain necessities which are due to many factors, but one of them is the inherent logic of whatever it is, which will delimit its trajectory, even if that trajectory itself is contingent and might manifest itself in different form. So that's what I wanted to say. So where were we? So a capitalist society, or a society that is inhabited by a capitalist economy is one that has on a current basis to work out how its economic social relations, its specific relations of production and exchange are to connect to and interact with a non-economic social relation. This is so in particular because, as suggested, the former happen to have an inherent tendency to expand into and become dominant relative to social context. For this reason alone, capital must be studied as not as a timeless phenomenon. Okay. Now, in this aspects, what we need to differentiate between capitalism as a civilization or as a social order, and capitalism as an economic system. Because capitalism as an economic system presupposes capitalism as a social order. That's at the level of ideal type, I guess. So, and capitalism as a social order presupposes a particular type of individuality, that is subjectivity, particular type of society and social relations, and a particular types of state, a particular type of and within social relation, then you would have economic relations and you would have economic system. So while it is true that when he says that in capitalism that is actually existing capitalism, there's a contestation going on between political and economics as to their boundaries, their mutual boundaries. But this contestation is within a historical social order, which presents itself as a capitalist order, but has not fully destroyed other tendencies. And obviously, this can never happen, obviously, unless capitalism destroys itself, because as capitalism approximates or reaches its ideal type, it basically self-destruct, as Streak has argued in his long piece, How Capitalism Will End. But here, so the contestation he is talking about, that's not in a sense within capitalism as an ideal type. That is within actually existing capitalism, because other tendencies. So it depends on how strong other tendencies are. Tendencies other than capitalist tendencies are still strong within a particular social order which calls itself capitalist order. But as we come close to a mature capitalism, these contestations become weaker and weaker, and that you see in the shrinking difference between right and left parties as to economic and social and political matters. And that's the exact manifestation of the fact that capitalism has, as a civilization, has overwhelmed any other tendencies, counter, and those tendencies are weaker and weak. That's what I want to say actually. Let's read it again, and probably that's enough for today. So, a capitalist society or a society that is inhabited by a capitalist economy is one that has, on a current basis, to work out how its economic social relations, its specific relations of production and exchange, are to connect to and interact with its non economic social relations. So, as capitalism matures, non economic social relations are themselves become capitalist. And this is so in particular because, as suggested, the former happen to have an inherent tendency, and that inherent we talk about inherent tendency because we are talking about ideal type here, to expand into and become dominant relative to the social context, to their social context. But as capitalism matures, social context itself become capitalist. For this reason alone, capitalism must be studied not as a static and timeless ideal type of an economic system, but exists outside of and apart from society, that exists outside of part of society, but a historical social order that is precisely about the relationship between social and economic. And that's his way of saying that capitalism is a civilization. It is a society as well as economy and individuality, a social order that came into its own in Western Europe in the early 19th century and became continuously and has continuously been evolving since. Seen this way, what is represented by economic theory as a technical arrangement for economic convenience, or as a causal structure of variable properties more or less suitable for expert control, cannot be recognized as a socially and historically constructed dynamic complex of institutional constraints and opportunities, expectations, rights, resources, and powers with far-reaching ramifications into the surrounding society, its distribution of power, status, and life chances, its action, dispositions, and capacity, than its social identities and ways of life. That's because economics is basically economics itself is an ideal type in a sense, an ideal type which says how capitalism should work, not how it works, how economy should work in the context of an ideal capitalist society. So it's economics should be seen more as rationalization and justification of capitalism or specific types of capitalism, rather than description of what actually exists in capitalism and its economy and its social relations look like. Okay, so let's stop here and we'll continue from here, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.